Kyle is giving us the time here. Good morning to everybody. Just a reminder before we dive into this section here, that Earl is in the prayer room today. If you need something's on your heart, go on up there, and Mr. Earl is there to greet you, and you can spend some time in prayer. Always a good endeavor. We're looking at 1 Peter 3, verses 18 through chapter 4, verses 6. 1 Peter 3, 18, 4 through 4, 6. And this chunk of Scripture is just almost specialized. It seems like to be the one I'm most uncomfortable with. So we are going to go through this. I'm going to read it through, and then you can see what you make of what I have to say about it. 1 Peter 3. For Christ also suffered for sins once for all, the righteous for the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit, in which he also went and made a proclamation to the spirits in prison, who in former times did not obey, when God waited patiently in the days of Noah, during the building of the ark, in which a few, that is, 8 lives, were saved through water. And baptism, which is prefigured, now saves you, not as a removal of dirt from the body, but as an appeal to God for a good conscience, through the resurrection of Jesus Christ, who has gone into heaven and is at the right hand of God with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same intention. For whoever has suffered in the flesh has finished with sin, so as to live for the rest of your time in the flesh, no longer by human desires, but by the will of God. You have already spent enough time doing what the Gentiles like to do, living in debauchery, passions, drunkenness, revels, carousing, and lawless idolatry. They are surprised that you no longer join them in the same excesses of dissipation, and so they blaspheme. But they will give an accounting to him who stands ready to judge the living and the dead. For this is the reason the gospel was proclaimed even to the dead, so that though they had been judged in the flesh as everyone is judged, they might live in the spirit as God does. Is anybody else like me in that they do not like to assemble things? If you go and you buy something and then you have to assemble it yourself, does anybody else get nervous about that? Okay, at least a couple of people. I remember one time we had bought a desk for Angie. She'd gone back to West Virginia. This was before we married, and my dad and I, we went to get a desk that fit in the corner. And the guy at the store, he's like, "Oh yeah, no, it's not assembled, but you'll get it like this. 30 minutes, you got it. It's super easy." Okay, so Dad and I, we go over to the apartment and we spend the entire afternoon working on this desk. Okay, we didn't finish it, so we had to go back the next day and we spent another time. Now, I want to say that my dad nor I are any good at putting things together. So this is not surprising. It took us 4 times longer than it would take real men to do. And so we got it done, and we have this corner fitting desk. It wobbles on over into the corner. It fits, and then we turn around and we look, and we've got a whole bag of pieces that were supposed to go somewhere. And to this day, I don't know where they are. And we're like, I don't know. Let's just hope she doesn't sneeze and knock this thing over. And it made it for several years, I'm proud to say. But to me, these passages feel like most of Peter fits together. We see, right, we know that we can expect suffering. We know that authorities will inflict suffering, and even if you're innocent, this is what Peter's saying. And we know that the Messiah suffered. All clear. We got that going. And then Peter throws us this curveball. And to me, it feels like we got extra pieces here. So we're going to try to make some kind of sense. It made sense to him when he wrote it. It made sense to the people probably who read it. It's just me maybe that's having a hard time with this. So, strange bit of thing. There's been a lot of discussion about it. Most interpretations fall into three classes. Okay. One is that between Jesus' death and resurrection, he went to the Hadean world, the world of the dead, and he preached the gospel to those people. That's what evidently the church fathers believed. Early church, that's kind of what they seemed to think. There was a real strong belief in the Hadean world anyway, and so they believe that's what Jesus went and preached it. The second classification, I guess would say, is that Christ preached through Noah. That this discussion of Noah here was Christ preaching and people refused to believe it. That apparently is what most of the reformers later on thought. Okay? Then there's a third option here, that before and after Jesus' death and resurrection, Jesus proclaimed victory over fallen angels and authorities and things like that. That seems to be a more modern take. That's the take I'm going to try to put forward today. I will choose that one because most of the commentaries that I have choose that route, and because, frankly, the other ones open more questions than I care to try to figure out. So you can feel free, if you are in another camp, if you're in one or two of the camps, that's great. If it works for you. I don't know that there's a real super clear answer either way, but I'm going to throw this out here and maybe it won't make it worse. All right. So, for Christ also suffered for sins once for all, for the righteous and the unrighteous, in order to bring you to God. I don't think it's, it might be stating the obvious in some ways to point out how this is fundamental to the cross, to what it is that we have our hope in, the fact that he says he suffered for sins once for all. That's really important, that he's making that atonement for us. Don't want to leave that out. And the point of that was to reconcile us or to bring us to God. So far we're tracking okay, I think? Okay. He was put to death in the flesh, but made alive in the spirit. Now, one thing I want to say is that a lot of what Peter is doing generally is to be encouraging. Okay? So I think what we're looking here for are things that would be encouraging. And this is with that. So resurrection means the power of the other spirits is broken. So you had the authorities, they inflicted this on him, and death is what he did. He was put to death in the flesh. The people in that audience had either, well, I don't guess they had been put to death, but people they had known had been put to death. People were being executed just in the same way that Jesus was. That doesn't mean that hope is lost. Jesus was executed. You might be executed as well, but that doesn't mean it was over, because it wasn't over for Jesus. Okay, and so then he goes and makes the proclamations to the Spirit. So I'm going to go through 4 things in this next section that I think are fairly clear facts. And we'll try to put them in some kind of order. One is he made the proclamation to the spirits in prison. We know that these spirits are resolved or talked about as people who in former times did not obey. And we know this is from the time of Noah. Okay? That's the second point, that they did not obey before. So he made the proclamation. I think that's probably the gospel. Or proclamation maybe of his victory to those spirits. Secondly, they did not obey. That's from the time of Noah. And third, the ark is going to be pointing towards baptism. That's what he says. The fourth fact, I think, is about this baptism. This is about an appeal for good conscience. It's less about washing and getting clean. It's more about appeal for a good conscience. Now, I want to pause there for a minute and say how important I think that is when you have been immersed and you've been baptized. You know that these confrontations are going to come. And you know that you're going to be punished. And I don't know, have you ever been in a situation where you've been accused or you've been punished for something, and originally you know that you didn't do it, but then after a while you start to doubt yourself? Like, maybe I did. Or did I, I didn't think I meant it this way, but it did. Like, have you ever been in a situation like that where you start to question whether your actual recollection is correct? Let's see. Yeah, so there was a confrontation I was having with somebody, one of the staff at work, and she said she had gone above me, and she said, he told me that he wouldn't let me do things because he thought I was too old. He said it's too old, and that's why he wasn't letting me doing things. And I'm like, I absolutely didn't say that, because I absolutely don't think that. Like, I don't think that's a thing. I certainly have never had a conversation with this lady about her age. I can't figure it. But then, as time goes on, I'm like, but did I? Like, I know, I do realize that she is of the age where there's a lot of things that she can't do. I didn't say that, though. Surely. And so, like, you get to where you start to doubt, and you're like, maybe I did. Maybe I did. Even though in the fact was, no, I never did. Never did do that. I think what's critical when those kinds of, if you're like me and you've had an experience like that, when you're getting caught in a confrontation or some kind of situation like this, having this clean conscience is super important. Super important. And we're not talking about like the chaotic sort of bad things that happen. This is intentional, calculated, Peter's talking about intentional, calculated persecution. When it doesn't matter if you're innocent, it doesn't matter, I guess it would matter if you're guilty, but it's not accidental, right? This is somebody, in the case of Jesus, right, this was a contrived effort to get this man crucified. Greg, did you have?
It was also the plan of God.
It was also the plan of God.
Which is kind of strange that we would see both those at the same time.
Yeah, thank you for making that more difficult for me.
Just one more piece to put in your puzzle.
Thank you for that. I needed an extra piece for my missing pieces. Yeah, I think in those situations, that having that clean conscience before God is super important. And you've made this commitment to everyone in your community. In a sense, I think for Peter, probably less so for us in the last many years, but this baptism is kind of like saying, I'm choosing this way and I know what it's going to bring is hardship, conflict, things like that, innocent though I may be. And I'm going to make mistakes. Even if you make mistakes, you've got the clean conscience knowing that you have aligned yourself with Christ in His death, burial, and resurrection. That this suffering once for all to bring us to God is part of what, and I find that really encouraging. I don't know, maybe you do too. I find that encouraging when dealing with hard things. At least I can go to bed at night and I know that I have a clean conscience about it, regardless what comes along. Somebody have something to say? Huh?
You're hoping, right?
I'm hoping. That would be fantastic. Okay, so there's that. So who has gone into heaven is at the right hand of God. So I'll point out, I think the right hand of God a lot of times is a symbol of being victorious, approved, like raised up over. And he says, with angels, authorities, and powers made subject to him. Now here's where I'm going to argue that's a sign of his victory over these things. Okay. So the commentary I read, and I haven't read, so please don't ask me any follow-up questions, but what I gather is First Enoch. Has anybody read First Enoch? It was, Greg probably has, John has. So any follow-up questions here from my extreme paraphrasing summary of First Enoch? So First Enoch was a real popular book at that time. A lot of Jewish people had read it, probably believed it. It was a big deal. And in First Enoch, I am told, a lot of it is about the idea of sort of forces behind the authorities, spiritual forces behind authorities, kings, things like that. And the idea in First Enoch was that God will or has overcome those things. Now, if Peter is pulling to or from and alluding to that kind of thing, then this makes sense of when he says angels, authorities, and powers. Because on one hand, he's talking about the very literal, verifiable suffering that has happened to Jesus, that's happening to them at that time. And then he's talking about angels and authorities and powers, which is not as literal and physical and go down the street to, Golgotha and see where it's happening. It's much more. So I think it brings all that in, maybe. Whew. All right. Come on, guys. How about some comments?
Okay.
Yeah? Okay.
A few years ago, I was trying to figure out some things about this, looking at Paul's writings versus Peter's writings, comparing them. And Paul says in 1 Corinthians, don't you know we'll judge angels? What in the world is that about?
Yeah.
And then you read Ephesians, especially 3:9, where he talks about the wisdom of God being known through the church to the rulers and authorities in the heavenly places. God exposes his wisdom and uses the church to be the light that shines that. And then Colossians has this incredible statement about Jesus, who all authorities are put under him, dominions, rulers, authorities, visible and invisible. Okay, and then he says that all things are going to be brought together in him. He's the head over all these things. That God chose through him, verse 20 of chapter 1, to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of the cross. That the cross of Christ has more than staggering implications.
Yeah.
Not just for the world, but for the whole universe.
Yes.
All the created creatures of God are somehow brought into a different relationship with God through the work of Christ. And his authority over them is not just so that he can have dominion and rule. It's so that he can redeem.
Yeah.
And how in the world could that be? Could it be the church is actually, even in our private moments when no one sees what we're doing and we're still doing what's right and we're being persecuted for it and we keep doing it, they see Jesus in that. And the world, through the church, exposes to the dark places, not just here but everywhere, God's wisdom and love and brings people to him. That may be something about what happened with Christ through the preaching to the people in Noah. God wants to give everybody a chance.
Yeah.
And to think that he would care that much to reach out even to the spirit world past tense tells us his redemptive work is greater than we could comprehend.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just kind of think about verse 8 where he says, finally all of you get one mind. And this is still kind of under that umbrella where Peter is still in the line of these are unifying comments, unifying things, trying to bring people together. Christ suffered just as we had suffered. Christ's suffering also unites us together. The message that was preached is to all, past and present. The God saving through water, days Noah and present. I mean, he's trying to bring us all together as unified.
Yeah, I think both of those things are critical, and I think a lot of times I, at least, have thought about the work on the cross and salvation is like, for me or my kids or my family, all of which is true, but I have always kind of missed the cosmic significance of it. You have Paul in Romans, because I thought about Romans 8, where it talks about all of creation being redeemed. You have the whole point, I think, is about launching new creation and overcoming all of the brokenness. And not that it's complete, but that it's started and it's moving forward, and that starts with us and how we're supposed to be. And so to think that the decisions that I may make, good or bad, or the habits that I may form, whether in prayer or how I treat, might have a significance larger than just what it is that I'm doing is a little bit mind-boggling to me. Like, if I'm being nice to Greg and we're having a good, maybe we're resolving a dispute in a Christ-like way, that's great. I think of it as just us resolving it. But I think that these kinds of verses point to a larger way where you are acting out and bringing in something that's part of God's cosmic plan, not just just being nice to each other and getting rid of a conflict or whatever the case is. And I think that's something that is that's a little bit intimidating to me to think of it that way, because I don't want anything that I'm doing to have that big of an impact. Like if I got any kind of weight on my shoulder, that's a little bit much anyway. The victoriousness comes from where he says, I think, being made alive in the Spirit. I think this is a part where he's talking about God resurrecting Jesus. And then I think also this who has gone into heaven, I think is referring hopefully to the ascension. Right? And we're taking part in that. So we can rest assured. So imagine that if I am in a situation where I am imprisoned or waiting for my beheading or crucifixion, whatever was the mode of capital punishment in the day, and I know I have a clean conscience, and I know it's completely unjust. What's happening is unjust. I'm innocent of what they're accusing me of doing. To know that, to have your hope in the fact that those people who think they're doing this have actually already lost. Jesus has already overcome those things. And I know this because he was resurrected. He overcame all that sin and all that injustice, that persecution on him. He overcame that and death, and I have aligned myself with him in my baptism. And so I can have that faith too. That's encouraging to me. I don't know.
Another quick promise.
Yes.
Put to death in the flesh, made alive in the Spirit. Which one lasts longer? The death of the flesh or the life of the Spirit? And that whole concept, the spiritual life of Christ, stretches backward and forward.
It does.
Into everybody's world. And so the offering of grace is given to all flesh, forward and backward, when Jesus died on the cross. Because his death was for all, but his life is also for all. And his life is that which lasts. And our struggle in this world, you're going to die once, and then you're going to face the check.
Yeah.
But life is going to continue. There's going to be something after. And we want to be on, like I said, aligned with Jesus so that we have that eternal life with him. But he's the one that caused that to be possible for us.
Very good. All right. Since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, so we've talked about a lot of the purposes of suffering. He says at the beginning of these passages, right, that Christ suffered to bring us to God. And then he's going to say here, we're going to see a sort of a transformational quality to suffering. He says, since therefore Christ suffered in the flesh, arm yourselves also with the same intention. He says, for whoever has suffered in the flesh has finished with sin. I can't remember who was it. I think it was John. I think you brought this up in a sermon a few weeks ago. Where it's these hard times, these tribulations, these things that form us into who we need to be. It's those times that transform our character. And I think that's what he's saying here. I know, I don't think it's a problem for me to say it, but Matt Maynard had told us that when Angie was in such a bad way, he was sort of in a lot of ways the darkest time that he had. But when he prayed, he said that there was something that changed in the way that he prayed, how he felt about prayer, how it caused him to grow so much. It was something that I haven't walked in that path, so I haven't probably experienced. I can understand it in some level, but going through those real hard times does change our relationship with God and how we feel God's presence is near. And I think this is kind of what he's talking about. It's like, not that we're finished with sin in the sense that we're just never going to do it again, right? But I think it does change our perspective. He says, so as to live for the rest of your time in the flesh, no longer by human desires, but by the will of God. So it makes, a lot of times, it shifts our priorities and makes things that we thought were super important and valuable and the things that we wanted to chase after in life, it turns them all upside down a lot of times, and we start to see things as they really are. I'm trying to think of a time that happened recently where you get, maybe it's a work thing or a school thing, and you're like, it's the big, oh, I'm so worried this is going to work, or an event that you're planning, you're like worried nobody's going to come, or something's going wrong, and then like you think that's consuming your energy, that project is consuming your energy, and then something actually happens that like really matters. My coworker, that's what it was. My coworker was talking. We were talking about that this past weekend. I said, "How was your weekend?" She said it was pretty terrible. I was like, "Why was that?" And she said, "Because a really close friend's child had a mass on her lung." And so they'd gone to Vanderbilt, and they'd all been waiting, and they'd been sleepless nights to find out what's going on. And like all of the other things that we thought were important, just receded. And I think this is kind of maybe what he's getting at. This is the way I'm taking it anyway. We don't have time to worry about those things that matter. And then he's going to spell some of these out. He says, you've already spent enough time doing what the Gentiles like to do. You've wasted enough of your life doing this kind of thing. And then he's going to live it out. He says, living in debauchery. Great word, debauchery. I'm not entirely, I don't know if the other translations use that one. Sensuality. So I looked it up because I was like, yeah, I'm going to make sure, because I might talk about debauchery once every 5 years, but it's not a word that's just regularly on my tongue. So, so evidently it is extravagant indulgence in bodily pleasure, especially with sex, drugs, and alcohol. Well, that's not very popular anymore. That must have been a problem then, but nobody's after that these days. Luckily, we've moved past that. He says you spend enough time doing these things. And then he talks about passions, which I think are pretty clear. Drunkenness, again, we're back into the substance abuse issues. Revels. So I looked this one up because I just want to make sure. This is noisy enjoyment. Drunk. Does that say dances? It's being noisy. I think it's the thing about it. It's like you're drunk and you're noisy. Okay. That again, glad that doesn't happen anymore. Carousing, fun stuff with that, and lawless idolatry. So I think what struck me when looking at these individually is how much had to do with substance abuse, is what we would call it now. Almost all of them had something to do with drunkenness. And I don't know, that just struck me. I think I've known people for whom this has been a major priority in life. Like, one of the things that they want to do is seek after these pleasures. It's really important to them to seek after these pleasures. Maybe there's different stages of our life where this is more of a priority than others. Yes, ma'am.
You said the word debauchery. Mine says unrestrained behavior.
Unrestrained behavior?
Would relate to the drunkenness because you don't have any self-control. You're losing your self-control.
Right.
Basically.
Yeah, and I think too that's sort of the point, is coming at it and like wanting to lose control and go for the drunkenness there. Yeah, unrestrained behavior. I like that. That's good. Debauchery is more fun to say, but that's probably clearer. Greg, did you have something?
I just think that Paul talks about in Philippians 3 about the people who their end is destruction, their God is their belly, their glory is in their shame, their minds are on earthly things. It just sums up the whole concept of you throw your life away in the world, for the world, to try to get pleasure out of the world, to somehow think you're going to be satisfied with the world, you'll be sadly disappointed. And you should read Ecclesiastes a couple times. Chase after and you'll find it's vanity. But coming after God starts with giving up everything. Okay? I'm going to die with Jesus. I'm going to be raised with him in baptism. Now I'm going to continue to die with him the rest of my life. Fleshly wise. I like that little statement where he says, for the rest of the time in your flesh. This is temporal.
Yeah.
I mean, what we got going on is not going to last. And if you go after the world during that time, you lose everything. If you follow Christ in that time, the world will mock you and make fun of you and try to pull you into it. But you will actually win. What looks like a defeat is a victory.
I think me probably reading into a lot of it, but I see that rest of your time and the fact that you've suffered, that you finished with sin. And to me, that calls to my mind the idea of sort of ages. So like I know when I was younger, the like having that good time was like super important, but that's partly because I hadn't had much suffering, right? And it was partly because that maybe I had the energy for it. I don't know. Now I want to just be real clear. I didn't do these things as a kid. Okay, I'm going to put that out. That wasn't me, Mom. Was not me. But most people did, and most people still do, I think it's fair to say. And a lot of it just seems like at some point, a lot of times we kind of get to a place in life where we've had other experiences and we're just like, yeah, no, that's I've spent enough time doing that. That's it. Colloquially, we talk about, that sow your wild oats phase, right? Probably not a great life strategy, but it seems to be one that a lot of us adopt. Yes, sir.
He's really talking about these things as childishness.
Yes.
These are something you do because you don't know any better. You're stupid. You're foolish. You're still so focused on yourself that you neglect the important things. And you know better now, Christian. You know better.
You've seen what it's. You've gotten a glimpse of what life is really about in the kingdom, and. Absolutely. This strikes me as like one of those things where, okay, guys, grow up. This is not what you're...
Spiritual suicide.
Yeah.
You may be feeling good about it, but it's like falling out of an airplane or something. You may enjoy the fall, but there's a landing down there. And God is calling us to salvation so that we don't have that. I think people it's blindness too. And I look at my own life, you said it before, like, I don't identify with that lifestyle, but I remember doing a prison ministry, and after 3 years of working with those guys, I thought, you know what? Getting to know them, if I were in their shoes, raised in their way, I would be doing the same things. And some of them came to Christ, and they were so ashamed of their past, but they were so thankful for their salvation. And they would say, I'm so glad I came to jail, because that's where I found Jesus.
Yeah.
Things like that show you that suffering has value, and punishment can also redeem.
Yeah. I think in verse 4, this is something that's interesting to me. He says, they are surprised that you no longer join them in the same excesses of dissipation. Okay, dissipation was a word I did have to look up because I actually didn't know it. I bet Bob Stewart knew it though. You probably say dissipation once or twice a week, probably. Sorry, didn't mean to do that to you. So this means the extravagant or constant pursuit of pleasure, including drunkenness. So again, we're back at the old thing there. But what struck me about this is it says they're surprised. And if you've been in that life and then you quit doing that life, People are actually surprised. Like that's like so many thousand years ago, people were surprised about it, and they're still surprised. Like, wait, what? You don't do this anymore? And so they blaspheme, which is interesting, isn't it? And I think that's going to get to the point we're here with the next part. Does anybody experience, or does that resonate, the surprise? Does that resonate with anybody else, or is it just me?
Yeah.
Just me? Oh, okay. Well, there we go. Thanks, Greg. Yeah. Yeah.
If not like them, people will regard you as alien to them.
Yeah.
And also feel judged by you.
Yeah,
You know,
they do.
You go around, everybody's passing the drink around, and you say no, and you pass it to the next person. You didn't do anything but pass it to the next person. It's like, what's wrong with you? Why won't you do? You think you're better than us? It's weird how light exposes darkness, and just a behavioral change makes those who are in darkness afraid. There's a judgment about it that causes an uncomfortable response.
Yeah.
Why are you being this way? Why aren't you like us anymore?
And if you do it for a moral reason, it makes it even harder. So imagine if you take the dissipation out of it and you just talk about a different thing. Maybe it's a culture or something in your work or family. Maybe we'll call it a dishonesty where you fudge numbers. Let's say you're fudging some numbers about something, and so your reports will look better. And then all of a sudden you're like, no, I'm not going to do that anymore. I'm just going to, because this is what the truth is. And then all of a sudden people are like, what do you mean? Like anytime you make that pivot and you take sort of that, this is exactly why you end up in a situation where you're getting persecuted. Right? Because that's exactly why you need a clean conscience. To stand and be honest in all things. Yes, sir?
A friend of one of my brothers, he lived this lifestyle very much so. That included being unfaithful to his wife. My brother converted into violent Christ. He's not being unfaithful, but his wife was really unhappy. Even though he was now faithful to her, she was really unhappy. He was no longer into that lifestyle. And she caused a lot of misery to him.
Yeah. It can, I guess it's always complicated. People are complicated, and we're just trying to make it work. But yes, sir, David.
It's, I don't know, interesting, and also very disappointing that the human nature has never changed, and that peer pressure is very real and often very powerful. And this example we could apply this very verse and this very example to most of our lives at some point in our history. Not that there's any confession you got to go on.
Okay, we're not David personally, just people in general.
We see all that all around us.
Yeah.
When the peer pressure to go along to get along, to do whether it's a work-related fudging the numbers, or everybody does, everybody cheats on their taxes, or everybody cheats on their spouse, or everybody. That's no big deal. It's a cultural thing. And Greg made the point that is very true, is when we choose to not join into whatever that category is of the darkness, those people feel judged, and so they attack. It's like shining a light. We shine a light, but they attack the light.
Yeah.
And that's something to be expected. I mean, we've all. I think we've all in a professional setting where no, I don't drink. What do you mean you don't drink?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I will say in that the more consistent and the longer that we are saying, I'm sorry, I don't drink, and people do begin to understand and accept. Okay.
Yeah. Ideally.
You also teach people in situations like that.
Yeah.
Because if they see you abstain from something like that, they want to know why.
Yeah.
Well, that leads to other questions, and you can teach people that way as well.
Yeah.
He says, the other verse, and I would like to just ignore it if we could just keep going, but he says, for this reason the gospel was proclaimed even to the dead, so they had been judged in the flesh as everyone is judged. Now I'm going to suggest, I would love, first of all, my personal desire is to think that God, or that Jesus does preach to the dead. Once you're dead, you got another chance. That would be great. I'm afraid that's not what he's saying. I would love for that to be what he's saying. I don't think that's it. I think what he's saying, if you connect it back to that part with the blasphemy, I think what he's saying is, Gentiles look at us and they say, okay, so you're not living your life this way, and you're going through all this persecution, being super unpopular, stick in the muds, and what's it get you? You die too. You are dead too. And then you think about Romans, Paul talks about in Romans 8:10, he talks about the judgment of the flesh is death. Right? That's death. And I think what he's saying is the gospel was proclaimed even to the dead. I think he's saying to the people who have died. Okay, I'm adding some words, which does change it, admittedly. So that they have been judged in the flesh. They did die. Their flesh has been judged as it was appointed. Everyone is judged. But then here's the last part. They might live in the Spirit as God does. The resurrection. The resurrection. They're going to be made alive in Spirit, just as he says Jesus was earlier. So I think what he's saying is that people are looking at that. They say you're living a pointlessly difficult life. You're going to die just like me. But the fact is that we know that the resurrection is coming. And that is part of the victory that Christ gave us. That's my take on that verse. Now, can somebody please offer me a way that he might be preaching to my dead relatives that didn't know Christ? That would be great. Anybody want to make that case? I'm very sympathetic. I'll put it that way. But I think that's what he's saying. Any comments on that bit?
Jesus says in John 5:25, "Truly I say to you, the hour is coming, and now is, that the dead will hear the voice of the Son of God, and those who hear will live. As the Father has life in himself, so he's granted the Son to have life in himself. And he's given authority to execute judgment, because he's the Son of Man. Do not marvel at this. An hour is coming when all who are in their tombs will hear his voice and come out. Those who have done good to the resurrection of life, those who have done evil to the resurrection of judgment." That's the words of Christ about what happens, but he still preaches to us. We hear his voice.
Yeah.
We're going to hear it.
I think there's probably a sense in which we're going to know more about things after we pass than we do while we're alive. Yes, sir?
Being able to preach directly to the dead would be difficult for a present generation because they're so involved, very much involved with the world and worldly things. Hypothetically, to preach to the dead, you have to develop your spiritual sense to that amount, and I don't regularly see that.
Yeah.
That's a theoretical thing. Yeah, I've heard stories out there about that, but I'm not sure about that myself.
Yeah.
And concerning the third theory about Jesus preaching to fallen spirits as in angels, that's not necessarily different from the first theory, which Jesus going to the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
Because in Jesus' day, demons, which we today call fallen angels, were considered to be the spirits of the dead.
Right.
Humans.
I think on that point,
Today we see Christians becoming angels after we die.
yeah, I think that's true. And one of the maybe the nuances that I didn't get was that proclamation. He talks about the proclamation to the spirits. I think that is a proclamation of victory. Your power and your domain is broken. It's over. New creation's happening, and that's less than like sort of. I don't imagine he's going and teaching the 5 steps. You know what I mean? Like, I think it's more like this. Anyway, okay. On that rambling note, we will close with a prayer. Heavenly Father, thank you for the time that you've given us today. we ask that you help us always to be able to approach hard times and suffering with a clean conscience that comes knowing that we are with you and unified with Christ. Help us, dear Father, to find encouragement in these words. Help us to encourage each other, as Peter was so so dedicated to doing. And dear Father, help us to go forth with the knowledge that what we do matters in a big way. And help us, dear Father, to ever stay loyal to you. It's in Christ's name we pray. Amen.